Hello and welcome to Mental Health Matters, a new show on Cape Town TV where every week we sit down with a mental health specialist to discuss all things mental health and more. Today we are going to be speaking to Rafiq Lockhat, who is a clinical psychologist with lots of experience dealing with trauma and specifically post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's more commonly known. After the break, Rafiq and I are going to sit down and discuss what happens to the body and the brain when we experience a traumatic experience. We're going to be speaking about being on high alert, our body being in emergency mode all of the time, even when they are not emergencies for us to be afraid of or things to be upset about. Now, before we do that, we are going to have a look at a short video that's discussing the difference between our normal brains and how we should be behaving most of the time versus an emergency brain or a survival brain after we've been in a trauma, to help take us into the conversation. Let's have a look.
Today, I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know, that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again. Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby, protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn, and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks.
Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and with us in studio now is Rafiq Lockhat, who is a clinical psychologist. And as we've said before the break, you know, we have touched on sort of generalized mental health up until now, but today we're looking very specifically at the trauma from serious and violent crime, and that's what a lot of what Rafiq has done. Rafiq, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
So Rafiq, I'm so happy to have you. I want to start with, you know, because you've got a long history, you've dealt with lots of violent crime and lots of other things as well. I think you've looked at trauma in young children and youth as well. And so I just wanted you to give us sort of an idea of what you do and what you've done throughout your career.
Right. So you froze a little bit there, but I'm assuming you're asking me a little bit about my experience with other kinds of work.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I started out life, I worked in all the different psychiatric hospitals in Pietermaritzburg. I trained in Maritzburg. I did my master's degree there. And I worked at a psychiatric hospital there. At that time, it was still apartheid. The hospitals were all separated, and there was the white hospital and the hospital for the rest of the people. And then from there, I came to work at Lenina. Lenina had just opened, and it was this the most amazing place. So it was a fantastic opportunity. I arrived here in '89. Didn't know anybody in Cape Town, but I really wanted to work at Lenina. And it was an amazing state-of-the-art hospital. It was, they'd taken a team over to Europe and decided to make a place that didn't look like a hospital. So every ward was designed like a house. The lounge and the bedroom, just to try and make people not feel like they're in some kind of mental institution. And I think that in 1989 was like very forward thinking. And it worked really well. Then I went back to Pietermaritzburg, worked at more hospitals, and then came back and ended up at UWC. And I had planned to go for just a little while and ended up staying 10 years teaching at UWC on the master's course and on the undergrad program. And that was an excellent learning experience for me personally, because when you train master's students, you train them to do therapy out in the community, right? And I think I've written about this. The students came back to say, listen, you know, all these wonderful theories that you're teaching us, they actually don't have any practical application outside, because the therapies are like you have to see the patient every week for 6 months or twice a week, you know, for 3 months. And they were saying very valuable things like, listen, people can't get off work. In the communities we work in UWC, people can't get off work every week. They can't get babysitters every week. They can't, there's transport costs. There's all kinds of logistic issues to come here to the campus. And so these therapies may be valuable in another context. Let's use the word, a more privileged context. But in this context, they aren't working. People can only come for 2 or 3 sessions. And, you know, we're not feeling like we're making a difference. So that got me thinking. This is like way back in 1994 now. And I started thinking about these students have a point, you know, they actually have a point. Because a lot of our theories and that were based on long-term therapies. That's just how it was. The like traditional stereotype therapies, talk therapy, you go once a week, twice a week for 6 months, 8 months, a year, 5 years, whatever it is. through that process. And we just don't have that luxury in South Africa. We just don't have it. The students forced us to recognize it, and it was a good thing. And from then I started searching for shorter, quicker, more effective therapies that are more cost effective. And that can be applied in a South African context. And let's face it, we have unique challenges. I mean, I've been around the world to many different countries. We have unique challenges in terms of the kinds of trauma South Africans experience on a daily basis. I mean, I have interns that come here to work at a place called some clinic where I work, and they come from Norway, and they're just in shock when they arrive, because if they see one stabbing a year, maybe they're lucky. If they see a shooting in their lifetime in Norway, they're lucky. I have friends who work at Grooterskie and Tygerberg in the trauma units, and all the overseas people come here. It's not really a badge of honor for us to say that, but the thing is that people come here to learn how to deal with gunshot to their heads and choppers stuck in people's brains, stuff they would never see anywhere else. And I'm sure there are other countries, but certainly in the so-called developed countries, and even some one doesn't see the levels of violence that we have here. So the answer to your question that you asked earlier, and that's really how I got interested in this. And I ran at UWC a thing called the Batutuzele Youth Stress Clinic. It was the first of its kind with the Medical Research Council, where we opened a clinic for young people suffering from trauma. And this was way back in 98, 99. So my interest started there, but I've always been looking for what can we do that makes it faster. And so over time, there's been newer therapies coming. Every time something new comes out, I go and check it out. Because, that's the only way you're going to learn new things is one can't still be using a Nokia 3310. Let's face it now. You could have one. You might be very attached to it. And I'm sure some people, apparently it's worth a lot of money if you have a Nokia 3310. You can sell it for a lot of money, apparently. I don't know. But we have to, new technology, new knowledge, as it comes out, we must embrace it, learn from it, not be afraid of it, and we must start applying it. So that's really, I mean, I'm very grateful to those students who forced me to think differently.
I mean, thank you so much for that, Rafiq, because there was a lot of nuggets in there. I think one of the things you highlighted, when we think about mental health in South Africa and access to mental health, a lot of what's been said is, and this is a real problem, that there are not enough practitioners and organizations that's providing the service. But what you're saying is also relevant from the other side in terms of transport and time and cost, when we're trying to think of innovative ways to give people access to mental health. Those are also considerations. And it's great that you're talking about in the community, because one of the things I know that they speak about in social justice spaces is to decentralize mental health and create hubs within communities so that people have better access. But I just want to move on to, when we're looking at trauma, you've spoken about, crime in South Africa. And so the chances for us are so very high for every single South African, regardless of where you're living, to have witnessed crime. We know the statistics in terms of being victims of crime, across the board, age, race, demographic, regardless of where you live. And so I wanted to just start off by looking at, when we're looking at trauma that results from a serious and violent crime, obviously this shifts people. What are some of the, you've had them in therapy, people have come to you, somewhere you wrote, this makes up 60% of your clientele. So when people...
Actually 70.
Actually 70. So when people experience violent crime, what does that look like? What does the aftermath look like? What does that trauma look like? And how does it manifest in symptoms? And I think I'm speaking about, so you've been through something, what happens afterwards?
Okay, so let me just go one step back. So violent crime is only one type of trauma. Okay, when we talk about traumatic experiences, there can be many different ones. Violent crime is one of those. Okay. Other traumatic experiences are being involved in a car accident, okay, or even watching a car accident, or like vicarious trauma, watching somebody get shot. Okay, you're not shot yourself, but observing it is that. Losing a limb. Okay, being extremely ill, you know, having massive panic attacks, all of these things. So any event that causes you to get a fright. And so I'm going to stay away from what I laughingly call academies, and I'm going to kind of keep the language at normalese. I'm going to keep it basic, simple, to avoid all the jargon, because that's not helpful in a forum like this. So any incident that frightens the hell out of you, okay, can be regarded as traumatic. And any incident that makes you feel very uncomfortable, so sexual abuse, for example, like there's no physical violence in a way, theoretically speaking, but if you're 4, 5, 6-year-old and there's a person, okay, man or woman, touching you inappropriately, making you do inappropriate things, it feels very uncomfortable. And so one can then call that a traumatic experience. So I want to broaden our definition of traumatic experience, not to include every single thing, like, you know, you fall off your bicycle, you're traumatized now. No, you fall off your bicycle, but you break a few bones and you think that you're going to die, or spoke goes through your neck. Okay, that's traumatic. So not to trivialize it and say, oh, everything's traumatic. People can do that, you know, everything's traumatic. It's not true. It must be an experience that's out of the ordinary and that is really frightening or makes you really, really uncomfortable. So that would be my definition. And that would cover all of those things, from sexual abuse, from being involved in an accident yourself, okay, from having a gun to your head, from being mugged, to being groped on the bus, to witnessing bad things happen. All of those things, in my opinion, can lead people to develop post-traumatic symptoms. Post meaning after the fact. Okay, so it's a very common term, PTSD. It basically means what are the symptoms you get after something bad happens to you.
And that was going to be my next question, actually, because, you know, PTSD has become the term has become so mainstream, and we're seeing it a lot, we're hearing it a lot in, you know, television series and books and magazines, and I know you said specifically you didn't want to trivialize it, but it almost has become, in the way it's being used, and sometimes the way it's even being joked about, in memes and so forth, it has almost become trivialized. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, can you define this term for us and tell us what PTSD is and what it looks like?
Okay, so there's difference to being upset about something. Okay, so something happened and now you're upset about it, and then a couple of hours later or a few days later, you say, oh, so traumatized. But a couple of hours later, it's like, okay, you know what, it's done. That's not PTSD. PTSD is where, and I'm going to use a model just to help people understand, and the way I understand it these days, okay? So our brain functions very much like a computer. Okay, computer has software, and the software tells the computer what to do, and then the computer just does it, right? You have a WhatsApp program on your phone. The program tells the phone what to do, and then the phone just does it. Right. If you don't have a new program, for example, if you don't have the upgraded version of WhatsApp, okay, your phone can't use it. So you're stuck using the old version. If the other day I was trying to open something and it kept saying to me that I don't have the new version of Adobe, so I was getting angry and irritated, but actually it's not my computer's fault. I just didn't have the program. So once I downloaded the program, my computer could do it. Okay, so just keep that thought in your mind. Like human brain. Human brain in this new model operates like a computer. It has files and it needs, so our brain's job is to tell us how to think, feel, and behave. In addition to keeping all our organs going, our brain also is where we get the instructions for what to feel, what to think, and how to behave. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, yeah.
Where does our brain get these instructions from? It gets them from software. Where does the software come from? It comes from things we've experienced growing up and later on. So remember, we're born with a blank hard drive. Okay, so almost like you buy a computer, but they don't give you any program. Computer can do nothing. It just sits there. You're gonna have to buy now Windows and all that stuff, and then your computer starts to work because it has an operating system. So we are generally born in this model. There are different ways of understanding. I'm just offering one way of understanding. Makes sense to me. Different ways of how I understand the brain, but my way of understanding is that we're born with a blank hard drive. And as we learn things, our brain simply downloads experiences every day, downloading. Then the brain has a system that the worst memories get a higher priority in the brain. Okay, the worst memories get a higher priority, meaning that the worst memories, what the brain does is that it takes that worst experience that you downloaded, because in your brain, everything is just data. Okay, your brain processes data, that's it. It's a data processing center. And as a result of the data processed, it gives you instructions about what to do, what to feel, and how to behave. So when something bad happens, our brain downloads that into the brain, and then it turns it into a YouTube video for easy storage. But it also does another important thing. It downloads the feelings at the time.
Okay.
Right? It downloads the feelings at the time. So now you have a video of the bad experience that's also downloaded all the feelings that you had at the time. Then the next important fact is nothing gets old in your brain. We used to think that new memories are stored here, old memories are stored somewhere there. In the new models, okay, nothing gets old. Everything is fresh the moment it's activated. So we'll call it fresh neural activation. And that explains why people sometimes say, I don't understand, it happened 30 years ago. Why is it still so sore? Because it never got old. It's freshly activated, and anything can trigger that memory. So if you're watching a movie, so let's say you were held up at gunpoint many years ago, okay, you know, gun, very traumatic. The guy clicked the gun, but it jammed, so you got saved. And then 10 years later, you're watching a movie, and there's a similar scene, and then suddenly you're sitting there getting like a panic attack and thinking, what's going on with you? Nothing's going on. What's going on is your brain simply found a trigger, found the file in your brain and connected it up. And then, because the memory never got old in the first place, it activates. Now, what we all have been doing is we've been trying not to think about bad stuff. Okay, so if we don't think about it, we begin to mistakenly believe that it's gone.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not. But it's a coping. So all of us need coping mechanisms to cope with trauma. And one of the easiest ways is not to think about it. Right. The problem with that is that it doesn't go away. Now, I'll explain what happens when it doesn't go away, because it doesn't. We now know it doesn't go away. Not thinking about something doesn't make it go away. Okay? It's there. And it just needs something to activate it. And that could be any trigger that's similar, a sound, a smell, a voice, anything, because your brain works on patterns. So anything connected to that bad memory, whether it's a smell, a voice, a sound, or the actual thing, you read a newspaper article, you watch a TV program, like a car goes past and it backfires. I had a patient recently who was in Afghanistan, and he was doing some work there. He put me in the office, and the car went past and it backfired, and he dived, grabbed me, pulled me under the table. Okay, I knew what was happening, but he was like a complete, because what happened is that the backfiring of the car outside reminded him of an explosion in Afghanistan where people got killed.
Yes, Rafiq, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. And, you know, that's something that I read very often. I think PTSD, if you read a lot of the, especially original research, they talk about men, you know, it was very much centralized around men who had been in the war and coming back and sort of having similar experiences like that. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we need to take a quick break.
Take a break.
And then we'll be back.
I'll drink some water in the meantime.
Okay, great. And we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we have been speaking about trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And with us in studio is Rafiq Lockhat, who is a clinical psychologist. And Rafiq, before the break, you were saying some really interesting things. So the one thing that jumped out at me is that, you know, if our brains were like a computer, it's really just processing a lot of the data, and the data is the experiences that we've had. But that when it downloads experiences, especially bad experiences, it also downloads the feelings associated with that experience. And this, I think, is really important for us to remember, that the worst memories or the worst experiences get top priority in our brain. And that is why, you know, when people talk about being triggered, often we'll see or hear or smell something that will bring back a direct memory, often a bad memory, and we'll feel back as if we were, you know, experiencing it again. And I think you were speaking sort of about that. You use an example of somebody that had been in the war, that had come back from war and heard a car backfiring, you know, and jumped to the ground because it felt as if they were, I'm assuming that they were back there again.
Well, the good thing is that he grabbed me as well and pulled me under the table with him. You know, so I'm saying that was his first, it was to grab me as well and save me. You know, something that he wasn't able to do for his friends there. So the thing that I've realized, and I was saying to you earlier on during the break, that the wonderful thing now is that we have neuroscience. Neuroscience is a recent addition to knowledge. And it's become big because of technology. You can study brains. You can actually follow information in the brain now. You can see where the information is going, what it's doing, all kinds of things. You can measure how fast information is traveling. These are all wonderful things because it's opened up a whole new universe for the rest of us, because now the brain is not this mysterious thing that we have to kind of generate theories and guess about what's happening. And it's going to get better and better as the technology gets more and more sophisticated. So it's helped. Certainly new knowledge is always wonderful. And sometimes new knowledge scares people because we're holding on to old stuff sometimes, and we don't want to let go because it's familiar and comfortable. But one has to keep up with all the latest things going on. So what we now know, and again, this is another model of understanding, is that there are, so you know how you have like a screen and you have the hard drive under the table, right?
Yeah.
If you had a virus in your computer, you would find out about it because it's on the screen, correct? You'd see, ooh, what's going on here? It's chaos. But let's say you didn't know much about computers and you thought the screen is broken. So you'd quickly run to replace the screen. But when you buy the new screen to put it in, the virus is back there again because the problem was never in the screen in the first place. It's in the hard drive under the table. It needs to be fixed in the hard drive under the table. Now, human beings have a conscious mind, and when the old term is an unconscious mind, but now we'd call it the screen and the hard drive. Okay. So the screen would be the equivalent of your conscious mind, where you find out what you're thinking and feeling. Okay, so let's go back to the virus. The virus doesn't start in the screen, it starts in the hard drive, and it works its way up onto the screen. The information travels, pops into the screen. With us, the information travels from the hard drive into the screen, which is the conscious mind. So when you suddenly start feeling something, it didn't start here. It started there in the back, where the hard drive is, where the trigger found a target. So that's good news for us. Why? Because in the older therapies, we've been doing management. Anger management, panic management, stress management, bad thought management. We put different theories doing that, but we didn't have a way to stop you feeling the thing. We had a way to teach you how to manage it.
Yeah.
Right, does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Okay, now, management is hard work depending on how stressed you are. Sometimes you can manage, to control whatever you learn, do this, do that, manage, breathe, calm yourself. Then other times you're too overwhelmed, you can't, and you just, okay. So the older therapies, or let's call it the traditional therapies, do management. First you feel it, or you get the bad thought, or you get the flashback, and then we should teach you how to manage that. And that was, you know, like the best we had at the time. And it worked because we'd worked, but it was hard work for the patient because they're constantly managing themselves. Right. What we now want to do is go into the hard drive and change the file so that the brain doesn't produce it in the first place.
I see. I mean,
Okay, so I know I jumped a little bit ahead. I
Yes.
jumped a little bit ahead in terms of treatments now, but
Yes.
I just want you to get an understanding of how things have changed. So we no longer want to do management because management, again, is hard work, it varies, and anything can trigger it.
And I would think that
Yeah,
also gets disrupted when there are sort of multiple traumas or multiple triggers and people become overwhelmed. And I know that, you know, I've spoken about myself also, for instance, when I have anxiety, and there are days when those tools or techniques can work and can sort of calm me down, but there are days also when there's a complete override and nothing that you're doing is working, and you literally, I just want to, before we move into sort of, you know, moving on from management, I wanted to sort of ask you about that. So when, you know, one of the ways that I've often described experiencing a trauma is sort of like a shattering of reality. It's as if we live in this boundaried world of what is normal and what we used to, and I think what is safe. And often when I've seen, and I've heard it described by other people this way as well, is, you know, this, I just want to go to the term that you used when you said something out of the ordinary and something very frightening or really uncomfortable. So something out of the ordinary happens, and all of a sudden, and maybe a car accident, you know, you slide off the road, and all of a sudden your perception of reality shifts, and the world in itself everywhere. And when you spoke about, you know, different things can cause trauma, I've often said, you know, sort of after my divorce, there was a shift there, and because there was, if I may say, there was, you know, a lot of deception. So there was a shift there. All of a sudden, no one seemed safe, and everybody felt as if they were lying, and you can't trust anybody, and the world reality doesn't make sense. And I've read that, you know, that is a crucial component of after trauma, that nothing feels safe. Does that sound a bit like what happened?
No, you're absolutely spot on. So the science behind that, because there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the brain, this other part here at the back, what we call the reptilian complex, or for our purposes, the hard drive, right?
Yeah.
Is processing info all the time. Now, when the information is processed, your brain just downloads it neutrally. Like your brain has no attachment, it just downloads the stuff. When it gets processed, your brain separates it out into safe, unsafe, unsure. Right. So every bit of information that comes, remember, your brain's job is to tell you how to react, how to feel, what to think. So every bit of information coming in, your brain only does three things with it. I'm making it simple.
Yeah.
It checks to see if the information is safe, is it unsafe, or is it still, is it not quite sure. So if you've downloaded an unsafe memory, it triggers all the time. Okay, it triggers all the time. So now you constantly, and that now in terms of brain function, it triggers what's called your limbic system, which is your fight or flight brain. Everybody knows that term.
Yeah.
But there's a part of your brain that triggers that. And when that triggers, basically your brain goes into emergency mode. Now, that limbic brain is there for a reason. It's there for a real emergency. So a small example, right? If you're standing outside and you see there's a Rottweiler running towards you. Okay, your thinking brain, what we call your prefrontal cortex, wants to do its job, so it thinks. It goes, that's a Rottweiler. What I know about Rottweilers, they're dangerous dogs. How fast is the dog running? Okay, where is it likely to bite me? Now, by the time you're doing all the thinking, the dog will bite you. Because you're thinking, and that part is doing its job. It's thinking, it's working things out. But it's a real emergency, so there isn't time. So what happens is your brain recognizes that as an emergency. It then pulls the alarm button, panic button, it hits to the panic button. And so immediately your emergency brain kicks in, your limbic system. What then happens, your limbic system takes over. and it says, hey, dude, you're going to get us killed. Sorry, shut up. I'm taking over now. Your limbic system overrides, and your limbic system job is now to activate. So immediately your heart starts to beat, okay, adrenaline gets pumped in. Adrenaline is like Red Bull. It's like 20 liters of Red Bull being pumped into you, into your muscles. And then either you're going to run like hell or you're going to kick the dog like hell. One of the two, right? But in that moment, your thinking brain is switched off because there's an action required. And often people will say, I don't know how I jumped that wall. I mean, look how big it is. Or, yo, I can't believe that I kicked the dog like that. That's not me, you know. It's true, because in that time, your thinking brain will have limitations, but your emergency brain is there to do its job. So that's why the emergency brain is important for a real emergency. When you've downloaded a traumatic memory, okay, your brain constantly trips that alarm system into emergencies that's not there.
Okay.
Okay, so you're constantly in emergency mode. Now, your body was never designed to remain in emergency mode constantly. None of us were designed that way. In the old days, people had cars without rev counters, so you know you could rev the car and you could take it into the red line and overtake. But then the guys would keep it there too long, and then they would blow the engine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why modern cars have electronic limiters to stop you over revving. Our brain doesn't have that system. We over rev. Right. When we over rev, physical things start to go wrong in our body, because remember, the emergency is meant to be for a short period of time. You kick the dog or you run and you get to safety. And then, okay, your brain and body reboots because the danger is over.
Yeah.
When you have an unresolved traumatic memory or traumatic memories in South Africa, very few people ever have one trauma. Let me just be blunt about that. Okay, we have multiple traumas in this country based on many different things, but I've yet to see someone with just one trauma. Okay, right. Now, having said that, now you understand that your brain's downloaded all these unsafe memories, which means they're constantly triggering the limbic system, which means your limbic system is constantly on high alert, which means that you never feel safe. Right. Then you start getting now anxiety, because, and people often with general anxiety don't know what they're feeling scared about. They just feel unsafe generally.
Yeah.
Different to a phobia where it's a specific thing. Spider. When I see spiders, I just run like hell. Okay, that's different. But if I see an ant, it doesn't bother me. With generalized anxiety, people just feel unsafe all the time. It's very unpleasant. But don't forget, now your body is taking the strain because that system is activating all the time. You basically, you're driving a car in the red line continuously. And no car can drive the red line. And, you know, there's very little break. Now you can't sleep. Now you have to take a sleeping pill to sleep. Okay. But that doesn't stop the revving happening anyway. So now you can see how people start to develop physical symptoms as a result of trauma. It's not the trauma directly, it's what the trauma does to the body that activates the limbic system that causes the body to produce adrenaline and cortisol, which is all okay for a real emergency. Okay. When you're running races in school, remember in school, right? We get on your marks, get set. Now, get set is a highly adrenalized state. Your body is pumping adrenaline because you need to run. If you pull it up there all chilled and relaxed, you'll come last. You're like, oh, it's a race, so cool, I'll park off here. But when the guy says get set, well, you're going to get set mode. And as soon as the gun goes off, you run. So you use up all the adrenaline. Now, PTSD is like being in get set mode all the time, but no one is pressing the gun to say go.
That's a very good analogy.
Anxiety is like that. So you're over revving, but there's no start and no end, and it's very unpleasant. Okay, so we're jumping slightly, but what are the consequences of PTSD? Consequences are, as I've now explained, that these physical problems start to go wrong because your body was never designed to be in permanent emergency. The limbic system was designed for a real physical emergency from our ancestors who were going to be eaten up by lions or tigers, so they had to react very quickly, either kill the lion or run. Right. Over the years, that got transformed into other people, feeling threatened by people or feeling threatened by work, even work situations. Okay, so now your limbic system kicks in. So it's designed to help you cope, but it was designed to help you cope with a very short period of time. And then the danger is meant to be past. Right, with PTSD memories, the danger doesn't pass in that part of your brain. It's there all the time. So you're on, what's the word, hyperarousal, we call it, right? You're on hyperarousal. It's just a fancy word for, okay, your body is over revving all the time because you're constantly feeling unsafe, so you're on high alert. It's exhausting. Anybody who's had it will tell you it's frick exhausting to be on high alert all the time. You can never relax. Now, what then happens, it starts to affect your mood. You become irritable, you become crabby, you become miserable. Then people don't want to hang out with you. Right. And then small things trip you. Because now, you know, you're so hyped up that anything can irritate you. So you start losing your friends and they say, oh, yes, he's hard work, you know, she's hard work, it's just whatever. So people try to understand, but they also get tired, you know, because they constantly have to deal with it. And so that's the next happens. Then it affects your thinking. So when you're in an emergency mode, by design, it switches off your thinking brain. That's why we tell teachers, don't scream at the kid. The teachers often say, hey, you come to the front, you stand here.
Yeah.
What's the answer? Now, the moment you do that, whether the child likes it or not, they're going to go into emergency mode. And emergency mode, by design, switches off your thinking brain. It's designed to do that. So often students who have exam anxiety, right? These are good students, they work really hard, but they stress. Now they go sit in the exam room and there's one word they don't know and then they freak out and then it trips the emergency bell. The emergency system kicks in, they get like a bit of a panic attack, the mouth goes dry, the palms get wet, they start to perspire and they go blank.
Yeah.
Right, now why do they go blank? They go blank because the system is designed to do that. Your brain can't tell a real emergency from a non-real. Your brain will just react to it.
You know, I saw a Facebook meme the other day that I absolutely loved, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And it said, I don't know, how do I teach my brain that sending an email is not the same as like fighting off a tiger? You know, it had sort of that comparison and connotation, and it resonated with me because emails.
Good. Okay. So
yeah.
Exactly right. So now the student then is calm, and of course, the more they try to think, the more they panic. More they panic, the more the logical brain switches off. And then 3 hours later, when they're out of it and the brain reboots, they say, man, I knew everything.
Yeah.
I knew all that stuff. Why couldn't I access it? So the science behind it is that when you're in emergency mode, your prefrontal cortex or your logic brain gets switched off by design.
Rafiq,
So
I'm
think
so
about
sorry.
the alarm system. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you again. I mean, I'm learning so much. I think we all are, just in terms of like what's happening with our bodies when we're going through these things and we triggered. And I think even just generalized behavior, I'm finding a better understanding even when I think about other people and sort of their behavior and sometimes why we think. But we have to take another short break.
I'll drink some water in the meantime.
Okay, great. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You are still watching Mental Health Matters. We are talking about trauma and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And joining us in studio is Rafiq Lockhat, who is a clinical psychologist and will be giving us lots of information on how our brain works and how trauma affects the brain and what PTSD looks like. And I just want to come in and say, you know, what stood out for me was ready, get, set, go, you know, and goes the trauma, and your body's stuck in this get set mode, which is high arousal, which makes lots of things that are not threats any longer seem like a threat. And so we're constantly in a space where our body's just like tensed up, and there's a lot of adrenaline for things that aren't really threatening. And I made the example of just sending an email. Sending an email can feel really threatening. And so Rafiq, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us all this information. Like it's just a better understanding of what's happening in our bodies and what's happening in our brains and why we feel possibly so overwhelmed and why everything seems threatening. And so we've only got a few minutes left. And so last words, I think I wanted to ask you, so now we know, now we can recognize that this, this, I think you described it as irritable. We can be, the consequences of PTSD can be irritable, crabby, miserable, small things trigger us and trip us up. We can, at times we can't think if we're triggered, our thinking brain switches off and we just go into the sort of emergency mode when it's not even an emergency. And so I think what I want to say is like, what I'm thinking of, if we know people who have been through a trauma, and they are exhibiting those kinds of symptoms as well, this is possibly why. Where do we go next with this knowledge? If I'm sitting at home and I recognize, oh my word, that's what it feels like for me. What can we do?
Okay, so just a quick thing. And also people avoid, okay? So they avoid going back. So if something happened on that road, you find all kinds of ways to go avoid it.
Yes.
And people also avoid talking about it, right? The reason, so often people want to help their friends or family and say, tell me about it, tell me more about it, okay? Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it makes it worse because it activates it, and then you go home, and then you left the person with a completely activated memory again, right? So that's not the same as being support. So what can we do about this? So the management tools help to manage.
Yes.
Right, that's important. Now, I want to add a very important management tool, exercise. Now, why? Why is exercise helpful? Because when the adrenaline pumps into your body, and people who have PTSD all will have headaches and neck and shoulder pains because they must have spasm. Okay? But because there's too much adrenaline, the body tries to protect itself, the muscle like a sponge, they overloaded, so now they squish. And they usually squish around here, so they pull. So now you get headaches, right? And headache pulls won't work because it's not a headache. It's caused by muscular tension that's squishing everything up, okay? So the first thing you have to do is learn to do vigorous exercise to get rid of the excess adrenaline. So it's kind of like squeezing out a sponge, right? A gentle walk won't do it.
Yeah.
A gentle walk is nice and sweet, but it won't do what it needs to do, which is meaning that you need to get rid of the adrenaline. People who have PTSD are looking for a fight. They're looking to fight with someone. They don't even know why they want to fight.
Yeah.
They want to fight. It's because the body is trying to get rid of all the, and remember, adrenaline is an aggressive hormone. Okay? So if you're just loading adrenaline, you're basically a fight looking for a place to happen. And so what I want to suggest, number one, is very simple thing, is start exercising. And then people can say, oh, Lord, here's the exercise thing again. But it's actually the science behind it. Okay, the science behind it is that it gets rid of the adrenaline while you still have the unsafe memory. So at least you're releasing the adrenaline, which means everything calms down. And yes, it'll fill up again over a day or two, but then you exercise again. So that's management. Okay, you're squeezing out the adrenaline, you're getting relief in your body, your brain is also calming down for that period. Okay, and what I want to say again, a gentle walk won't do what this has to happen. If you get a punching bag, or even you get a pillow, take the pillow and whack it as much as you can, whack the pillow onto the bed. Do that every day. Okay, that releases the adrenaline, and do it until you're exhausted. I know it sounds like not people will tell you this, but do that. Okay, whack that thing until you're exhausted, the adrenaline's used up. Now your brain, your body has a whole day for it to kind of reload the adrenaline, but at least you've got a release mechanism. But whatever management techniques you've learned, breathing, meditation, it's sometimes very hard to meditate if you've got intrusive memories, but those are all useful things to do, okay? Eating good stuff. People often cope by eating chips and chocolates and sweets, okay, because it makes them feel better temporarily. Remember now, you're putting junk into your body that's already taking strain from all the other stuff, and now you're clogging up your kidneys. And I'm not saying don't eat chocolates and chips, but don't binge like an entire thing, because your body is already battling. And now you're pumping in a liter of Coke and 3 packets of chips and 5 kusisters. You're not helping your body. It's like driving a car uphill that's overloaded with bad petrol and saying, oh, this car's not going well. So that's the one thing. Ultimately, you're going to have to get therapy that deletes those memories out of your brain, ultimately. Right? There isn't a way to escape that. And that's my take on it. There isn't a way, or we'll be constantly doing management, which is okay, but then just accept that we're at management. So what we're talking about is how do I manage all these bad thoughts, these bad feelings? There's something called very simple technique called thought blocking. You put an elastic band on your wrist. And when you start to think bad thoughts, you sting yourself. Not that there's blood, but just sting yourself at anal. So what that does is that it disrupts the thought processes temporarily. And then you can quickly replace it with like a better thought. Okay, again, that's good management. It's helping you cope with the situation. So ultimately, how do we cope with it? Is all these various techniques that you can get on the internet very easily. The ultimate cure is we have to go into the brain and go into the hard drive and delete those files. While they're there, there isn't a way for your brain to stop feeling, thinking, and generating those behaviors that are causing it. There isn't a way for your brain to stop it because it's a program.
Yeah.
And once it's there, you keep running.
Thank you so very, very much. I found that extremely useful, and you're right. You know, the exercise, every time we hear it from every doctor and psychologist, and every time we hear it, I keep asking them, yes, but, you know, but this is a really, really good practical example of why it's important and why to do it, you know, with a specific outcome. So that for me at least has been very helpful. We have come to the end of our time together, but I want to thank you so very much for being on the show and coming and sharing with us.
It's been a pleasure. Okay. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, and thank you all at home for joining us. That brings us to the end of the show. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.